My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander to the armies of the north, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I shall have my vengeance, in this life or the next. Hello and welcome to Performance Check. My name is Rob, and once again, I have been met with technical problems. Anything I try and do to improve the situation, I am met with further difficulties. This time, it seems, I went live on my own personal Facebook rather than the Absolute Tabletop page, which is fine, but I saw people like that I know from my different work projects and things, and they were going to be they're going to turn around like, why did you go live to talk about Gladiators? What? So yeah, there we go. So anyway, I'm starting again. My name is Rob. Welcome to the channel Performance Check. And today, I'm going to talk about gladiators. Gladiators in your role-playing games. Now, I find it a fascinating subject. Gladiatorial sport. And that's what it was. It was a sport. It was a blood sport back in ancient times. In fact, I probably should have done a bit of research to see when the last gladiatorial match was. I suppose you could argue that boxing and MMA and stuff is still gladiatorial, but just not to the death and not fighting animals and slaves and things like that. But I wanted to talk about them in role-playing games because when I'm doing a sandbox, I will always include some type of arena, and there are a few good reasons why I do that. And I'm going to talk about a few of those reasons, and then I'm going to put to you the examples of what you've used in your role-playing games for gladiatorial arenas. Have you based entire games around the idea? I've seen in fact, no, I'll save that. I will talk about that in a bit. But I have a very, very interesting concept that I saw someone do for a gladiatorial-based game. I'll come to that later, though. So, for now, then, I'm going to talk about the different ways that you can include them into your game. Number one, I think, is the most common in most role-playing games, at least in Dungeons and Dragons and things like that, is the fighting pits. The fighting pits are generally places that you find in the back alley taverns and stuff where there will be people having a brawl, and you could place money on them. It's a common thing to do with your taverns and things like that, is to have an organised fight go on. And people are basically putting bets on it, and it's a good way for your players to either place bets or to get involved in the fight themselves. I've been involved in a number of games where they've got you've got a really strong character, like a fighter or a barbarian perhaps, that intentionally goes into a fighting pit, and then members of the party then place bets on them because they have a good feeling about if they're going to win or not. So it's a good way for them to generate income. To the point in one game that I ran where the players actually took over the fighting pit itself. They actually they took over the management of it and were taking a cut from all the bets. They just had started this entire business that they would come back to, and they would then get gold that had been earned from the fights that had happened there every night. So that's a really great way of doing it, and it's the idea of an organised fight and the fact that it can be a one-on-one thing, so it introduces that same tension that we discussed in dueling. The same one-on-one is either you or me that's going to walk out of here alive, or at least the victor. It's just a really cool way of adding an element of tension into your game and into a fight. Now, the difference being is that with it being either a fighting pit to the gladiatorial arenas, there is an audience. There is an audience watching you fight. And all of a sudden, the idea of killing your opponent isn't the only objective. There is another objective: entertain the audience. And that's something that I want to talk about, because there's the archetype in the player's handbook, I believe, that is not the archetype, it's a background, I believe, isn't it? There's a gladiator thing that you can take. I love the idea. I love the idea that perhaps there was a gladiator who had to like win his freedom to then be liberated, to then go on to become sort of like a someone who fights for freedom because he was forced to be, or she was forced to be a gladiator. Um, Now, as I explained in the stream that I did upon my own personal Facebook before I had to stop it, I have explained that my phone is neatly balanced upon a radiator, so it isn't shaky, and so I have my hands free, but I do realise that I'm going to have to pick the phone up to read some comments. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read some comments because I can see a few people are watching. I see Richard Phillips has joined. Alan Holloway has joined. Hey guys, how's it going? Ben Lashmar says, intrigue ahoy at the games. Absolutely, much intrigue can be found here. Chris Wilhelm has joined. Hey, how's it going, Chris? For those of you interested in learning more about jewels and how you can apply them to your roleplay, I just realised I put my vape there. If those want to hear more about jewels, go and check out lower down in the feed of Absolute Tabletop. Chris did a really excellent stream earlier about duels and continuing that conversation. Alan Holloway says, I ran a gladiator scene in my Savage Land game. Barbarian, saber-toothed tigers, four-armed gorillas, shifting terrain, announcer, cheering crowd, and ruling kills. I believe that's kills. Once again, if your comments are too long on my streams, I'm afraid they just cut off and I can't read them for some reason. I do not know why. I apologise, Alan. But that does sound like a really cool thing. And I can imagine Savage Land, like, obviously there's going to be less of a sort of I can imagine there'd be less of a organised government there, perhaps. So that is the people that are in charge. That's a good way of letting people blow off steam in a way. In fact, that's why a lot of studies have gone into the fact that why gladiator arenas and tournaments happened in the first place was so people could get their fix of violence without starting a riot. Basically, that's why it existed. And it was a good way of showing quite a lot of propaganda as well. Obviously the most famous gladiator arena in Rome, the Colosseum. That was a great place for propaganda. Essentially, that's where the emperor, the Caesar at the time, would insist that they would show mighty victories that Rome were winning, and they would reenact them for the audience to make them feel good about their country and their empire. And I wonder, in your games, what kind of message is the person trying to send who's running that gladiatorial arena in your game? I wonder. That's something we can discuss. Loker has joined. Hey man, how's it going? Jeremy Lilly says, I ran a PBP game for almost a year, I think, where the players took on the role of Lannister, yes, the Lannisters, yes, I've seen Spartacus, I know that word. And each of them ran a Ludus, School of Gladiators. And once again, Jeremy, the comment was too long, so I can't complete the thing that you said. For those of you who wish to leave comments, make sure that it is make sure it's 4 lines and that's it. Maybe less, just to be on the safe side. But that's a really cool idea. Like the entire society behind the gladiators, they were actually looked after remarkably well once they got to a certain skill level, as it were. Like particular champions were sort of visited by maidens and the like, and they were well fed because they knew that if they treated their gladiators well, then they were more likely able to perform better. If they're starving them, in the under the Colosseum or whatever, then they're not going to get as good as results, are they? Let's see what else we have to talk about. Melvin says, I haven't had the opportunity of running a gladiator-themed game, but if I were to run one, I'd take a jab at Hunger Games Battle Royale type of game. Yeah, well, that's another cool way of looking into it, isn't it? Like, maybe, like with Battle Royale, there's because society is so dysfunctional, the totalitarian regime deem it fit that certain schools are made an example of, for example, and it's population control as well, I believe. But let's face it, and I'm gonna probably get flack. Maybe I'll get flack, maybe I won't. But let's face it, Battle Royale is far superior to Hunger Games, which, in my opinion, is an obvious, blatant rip-off. And it frustrates me when people like really rave about Hunger Games. And I'm like, have you guys seen Battle Royale? And they're like, what's that? And I'm like, oh my god. So, but that's just me being elitist, perhaps. Uh, Chris Owens says Pathfinder had some decent gladiatorial combat rules. Basically, you should gain bonuses or negatives based on the crowd. Absolutely, it comes into the mechanics as well. As we were saying in our dueling conversations, that it is pretty wicked when you have a social aspect or a psychological aspect come into it, where you could um, be convincing enough to show that you're fainting, so that they think you're going to attack one place or the other. That you can psych them out, you can intimidate people in a duel as well, so people won't fight as confidently. And yeah, absolutely. If you feel the crowd turning on you, if you've got a whole hundreds of people jeering at you, that's going to be incredibly distracting in a fight. I've got to say. Chris Williams does then say you could sway the audience to give you enough bonuses to defeat a much powerful targets. Absolutely, it's kind of like a really great way of portraying the underdog, sort of rising up throughout the gladiatorial sort of ladder, as it were. So if you get the audience on side, you never know. You might be able to beat the more martially gifted gladiator, perhaps. Michael Kennedy says gladiators are interesting, but have an obvious design problem. If the GM is unwilling to kill players, then the party simply gains a massive amount of. I'm guessing you're saying gold. Guys, try and make the comments short. I'm so sorry. I wish I could read them properly. I blame my phone. This is why I wanted to get my laptop working. It's a nightmare. I'm going to try and fix it somehow. But I know what you mean. If you're unwilling to kill the party, they get a massive amount of gold or XP. Is that what you're trying to say? And I think it's a tricky one. I think that is a tricky one. But at the end of the day, gold, I don't mind my players getting gold. I think you're about to say amount of loot, probably is what you're about to say, maybe. LO. That's when it cuts off. Ben Ishmael says, update the idea with mech battles for future worlds, UFC, boxing, wrestling for more contemporary ideas. Yeah, man, I never saw it, but there's that film called Real Steel, isn't there, where they pit robots into boxing rings and stuff. Never saw it. I heard it wasn't great, but yeah, there's absolutely that as well. If you look to Star Wars, there's arenas in Star Wars, isn't there? And that's a admittedly fantasy future setting, but still, that's a pretty cool idea, isn't it? Michael says a simple way to incorporate the twist is Jabba's palisade. They get tossed in by a boss NPC villain and must survive. Yeah, like I think. Well, absolutely. Like a number of slaves in historical gladiatorial circumstances were just thrown in, and some of them just happened to survive and get better at doing it until they either won their freedom or sadly perished at the hands of the gladiator or lion. you know. Pretty nasty. But then that's the other thing. In a fantasy arena, you don't just have to have lions and tigers like they do in Gladiator or whatever. Like, can you imagine if you get dropped into an arena and then they say, and now brought in specially are the orcs of Darren and Then, and the gate opens and there's like a horde of like the deadliest orcs within your setting, or the doors open and I don't know, a beholder comes out. It could be anything. Like, it could be a magical arena designed to keep like monsters from escaping and stuff. And they are forced to fight monsters. Like, they could unleash a hydra into the arena, for example. That would be a spectacle, wouldn't it? Like a hydra fight. There's all sorts. And then I suppose a strategy could be is to somehow just, sabotage the arena so when monsters are let out, they can then escape into the crowd. Although, although that might not be the nicest thing to do if you're playing good guy characters, because then that might mean that innocent people will die, but then again, that's innocent people enjoying and paying to watch people get murdered by each other. So, swings and roundabouts. It's a really interesting thing. And like I say, there should be some kind of reward for those who complete uh, gladiatorial matches. It's a good way of rewarding players. Um, it is a great way of making your players look at combat in a different way. Instead of them doing their standard spell setup or their standard like martial setup or whatever, you can have them try out different combat moves to be more impressive. uh, a risk reward system. The more risky the move is, but impressive it looks, like the more damage they can do, or things like that, or the more effect they have on their opponent's morale. Um, there's just so much you can do with it, like, and the entire society surrounding a gladiatorial arena as well. I find fascinating. Like I was saying earlier in the stream about the propaganda and things like that. Let me tell you guys quickly about the campaign that I saw, which what I thought was a great idea. Well, I call it a campaign. It was an ongoing game, but it wasn't so much a standard campaign. Basically, the idea was that you could basically, and this was in a store that doesn't exist anymore, sadly, near where I used to live. And you were told that you could create a character, and they'd have to be of a certain level, and they could spend a certain amount of money. And then you could bring this character along for a night, which is basically just an entire evening dedicated to people bringing in their players, their playing characters for PvP. And whoever, like, it was kind of like a tournament that was held in this store. And I thought that's such a cool idea. Just like, it's not a straight campaign. People could just rock up with like a character and just plunk them on the table. Off you go. This is your D&D gladiator that you're bringing into the ring. I always thought that was pretty cool. Um, I personally wouldn't like dedicate like a long game to that, but like I don't know, maybe that's something I could replicate online. Maybe I could like have guest players come in, bringing in a character, and we just do sort of like a narrative gladiatorial battle. It could be like a whole series. This is a great idea. I think I might do this actually. And like they can have their own stories that they can sort of discuss, and we can incorporate throughout the battle. Um, and it was only like short games, people could just bring a character, see what happens. And it doesn't have to be PvP, it could be like a bunch of gladiators versus a bunch of monsters and stuff. Yeah, I like this. I hadn't actually thought about incorporating this into stuff that I was doing, but now that I'm thinking about it, the more I like the idea. I could The capital of the Nine Kingdoms, which is the setting that I run the Lawkeepers in, the capital is called Sovereign, and I have always seen it as kind of like the center of the empire, essentially. Like it is essentially Rome, of the Roman Empire. Like it is, not in terms of technology level, it's sort of more medieval, but like that kind of feeling where like it is the pinnacle of civilization. It is basically everything there is top notch. But I love the idea of them having a gladiatorial arena there because whereas the society is a relatively stable one, it isn't a nice society. It isn't a place where people's rights or lives are taken into consideration that often. So yeah, maybe I will run something like that. That would be pretty interesting. A gladiatorial tournament within my setting, perhaps. Who knows? So how do you guys incorporate? Is this something that you've done before? Is this something you would like to do? Um, I think it's just really interesting. And it's really fun. That's the thing. It's just super fun because it adds a new dynamic to combat. So it freshens up combat. If you're sick and tired of the same old sort of like roll initiative, we kill the goblins, we move on, we kill the kobolds. Throw one of these in, maybe. Like it was said earlier, do like in Jabba's palace, have people thrown in and have to fight for themselves. Put them up against the Rancor, you know? Um, yeah, it's pretty cool. And again, you could do another thing. You could make it a bit simpler and make it like I was talking in the stream, like a fighting pit. There could be like a notorious fighting pit, like a D&D's MMA, you know. Yeah, I really like that idea. I'm definitely going to do something with this. The annoying thing is, I keep thinking of games that I would like to run, but I just don't have. I don't have the ability, the time to do it at the moment, unfortunately. which is a shame. But I'm excited about maybe doing Gladiators though. That would be really cool. Um, I think that's about it. Unless anyone has any questions or anything to add to the topic, but it's food for thought, isn't it? That's the main thing. I like the idea of it being like a an alternative, and it could be like a whole arc of your campaign, perhaps, where your characters actually have to, you know, get to a certain level to escape, and by doing that, they have to remain in as gladiators for a number for the amount of time that it takes. And each encounter is obviously giving them more and more experience, which is meaning that in game they're getting stronger and more proficient in a fight and stuff. It's very cool. And I think the other thing that you should consider is if you are going to include a gladiatorial sort of function in your society, then what does it serve? Why is it there? Is it there for propaganda reasons? Is it there to sort of allow the general public to blow off steam so they don't personally cause a riot because life is a little bit harsh perhaps in where they are, in your kingdom perhaps, or in your setting? Good thoughts. I like this. This is good fun. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Actually, short and sweet. I think I say short and sweet. I can't actually tell how long this has been going, but if you like this video, then give it a like. If you'd like to see more like it, then give me a subscribe or not. We're all friends here, or are we? Take it easy and hope that all of your performances are up to standard.